Enter the world of the paranormal with us at Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us on our quest to uncover the truth behind the unexplained. We promise an unforgettable ride filled with mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Something haunting a cafe in Prescott, Arizona. In 2013, I worked as a baker at a small cafe in central Arizona called the Wild Iris. It's still in business. It was a super old building and had a reputation for being haunted among staff. I was quite skeptical at the time about all things paranormal, but also curious. So I spent a week or so inquiring fellow coworkers about their experiences. I would hear stories from other bakers who would come in at 4 a.m., unable to turn or get the lights to work until 5 a.m. This is when the baristas would arrive. Other stories included things like rags flying off the countertops or moving around while people turned away. Creepy, but not convincing. I remember feeling compelled to have my own experience and felt energetically open to invite something paranormal to happen. During that time, I was scheduled after hours with 2 other coworkers to dust the air ducts. We were instructed to throw tarps over everything so that dust wouldn't dirty the workspaces. I was in the bakery, which was essentially a tiny workspace connected to the coffee area. I threw a large tarp over one of the rolling speed racks, a tall portable shelving unit, and that was filled with empty squeeze bottles for caramel and chocolate sauces. Once I got to the top of my stepladder to begin dusting, I noticed a single squeeze bottle sitting on top of the tarp. There were no storage above the speed rack, so I had no idea how the bottle managed to get on top of the tarp I had just thrown over it. I was so baffled, and so were my coworkers. However, I wasn't convinced that it was a ghost. The next night I was scheduled and told everybody about my experience. Eventually, it was just me and one other coworker, the barista, closing the shop. There was only one customer left on the opposite side of the room. I think it was a young man reading by the front door. We spent all night discussing paranormal stuff and really creeping ourselves out. It got to the point where I had to stop talking about things with her because I was so unnerved by the energy that we were stirring up. Shortly thereafter, I bent over to get a trash bag out of a cabinet beneath the sink when I heard a noise from behind and above me. It sounded like a woman's voice, but a combination of a growl and spoken words, and it was textural. I've never heard anything like it before. It was like someone was speaking from another dimension, almost staticky. I immediately froze and went a few seconds trying to logically understand what I just heard. I knew it wasn't the song playing on the radio because it was much louder than that. I knew it wasn't my coworker behind me, but after finding no other explanation, I turned around and faced her and said, "What was that noise?" My coworker looked at me and said, "I thought that was you." We both froze in disbelief, and at the time, we were both equidistant from the espresso bar that had several coffee cups stacked on top. After a couple seconds of just staring at each other, we both noticed something on top of the espresso bar moving and kind of looked at the same time. One of the cups floated a couple of inches into the air, wiggled a bit side to side, and then lowered itself back down. We both looked at each other to confirm that we had both just seen that, then ran to the bathroom on the other side of the building, laughing hysterically, flooded with adrenaline. I was just so utterly in awe of what had just happened. I remember saying out loud something like, Okay, I get it. I believe you. Not the scariest thing ever, but to this day remains the most bizarre and unexplainable thing I've ever witnessed. I would not mind being served espresso by a ghost, but that's just me. Two experiences with apparent doppelgangers. The other night I was just talking with friends. I was reminded of two stories that happened to me. They involve apparent doubles of people that I knew. Probably about 10 years ago, my friends and I were playing a game I made up in a large local cemetery. The game involved one team with flashlights guarding a MacGuffin object. Usually it was a dim red blinking light that I had, like something you'd wear at night jogging or cycling. The other team would try to sneak past the guards and retrieve the light. Basically, hide and seek meets catch the flag meets flash tag. We had just finished a round and we were gathering around large tombstones where the light was sitting when the game ended. We were calling out for the hiding team to come out and the game was over. Most of the 7 or 8 of us playing were there and, well, we were just waiting on Dan. I was looking around and spotted a silhouette in the near distance. The cemetery's on a hill and the backside of it is mostly set against a steep drop-off, with one of the paths running along the edge. This night was pretty bright with moonlight and light pollution from the town, so it was pretty easy to pick him out against the sky as he walked down the path. "Oh, there's Dan," I said to the group, pointing. Right after I said that, Dan came walking up from my right. I was so taken aback at his sudden appearance, it took me a second to look back up where I saw the person walking. Obviously, the figure was now gone. This admittedly may not be a paranormal experience, but a creepy encounter with a person. But here's a few reasons it may very well be paranormal. I was completely sure that it was Dan, for one. When you're good friends with somebody, you can recognize their gait and posture as they walk. This, combined with the figure's body type and hair matching Dan perfectly, made me totally sure that I'd spotted him. The other reason I don't think it was a person is that they would have had to walk back the way they came, clearly visible against the sky, or pass us under the cemetery office lights to get out of the cemetery if they were walking to the back corner. It is possible that they just walked off into the woods, but I doubt they could have walked down the steep, densely wooded hillside quietly. Our investigation over to that part of the cemetery, of course, didn't turn up with an explanation. But now for the second story, which I'm confident in claiming is paranormal. I worked at a Sears in my hometown in 2013 as a warehouse worker. One of my jobs was to stock items, clothes, and tools, all that. That was in the main warehouse in the back, or any of the smaller stock rooms around the store in different departments. One stockroom in particular always gave me and my buddies the creeps. I was never sure why. It was pretty big, more like dividing the clothes and soft-line departments from the tools and appliances. The inside of the stockroom was divided into 2. One was the storage for the shoe department, with sliding ladders like a library to get to all the shelves. You could walk through from the shoes entrance and exit a door in the appliances. The other side was sort of sectioned off by a chain-link fence with shelving attached. And this part, for children's clothing, only had one door in and one door out, even though you could see through the fence to the other side. When you walked into this room, the wall was on your right, and to the left was a long line of shelves with some folded clothes and some shirts on hangers. You would have to walk nearly the full length of the room before the shelf ended, and you could turn to the left and access the rest of the stockroom. I was by myself unboxing clothes. This is when I heard the door open. I was next to the door, but on the other side of the shelf. I looked up and saw the top of my coworker Jake's head above the hanging shirts. Since he was one of my friends that thought that this room was creepy in particular, I tiptoed quietly next to him on the other side of the shelves as he walked down the corridor. When he almost was at the end of the shelf, I jumped forward and yelled, and there was nothing in front of me. Although I was very positive I'd seen Jake's head above the clothes as we both walked to the end of the aisle, he wasn't in the room with me. I'm getting so wigged out just remembering turning the corner to empty space. After a few seconds, the door opened, and this time for real, and Jake actually walked in. He asked if I was all right because he heard me yelling to try to scare him, and now I looked pale and freaked out. I lied to my manager and said I'd finished stocking the clothes so I didn't have to be in there the rest of my shift. I only later found out from the assistant store manager, Irene, that she had once found a man who had a heart attack and died in the hallway of the restrooms. This hallway, of course, was where the door to the creepy stockroom was. When she was the manager of the shoe department, whose stockroom is adjacent to the creepy one, she came in early one morning when the store was extending its hours for the holidays. It was still dark out before they opened, and she was sitting by herself. She was about to eat a quick breakfast. She heard one of the sliding ladders squeak, and when she turned to see who it was, 2 or 3 of the ladders were sliding back and forth down the shelves, all on their own. "12 Jinns, demonic, in one body, true story." We were a joint family. My parents, younger sister, paternal uncle and aunt, 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. My cousins were older than my sisters, and me, and we had an age gap of over 8 to 10 years. My father and uncle were pretty close, so we stayed together in a building where the ground floor belonged to us, and the first floor belonged to my uncle. My aunt and my mom were just cordial. However, my aunt loved us, and my mom was very affectionate to her children too. One day my cousin, let's call her Sue, she came home from college and started acting very strange. Sue didn't do the usual stuff, like washing her face or eating something. Instead, she went straight into the bedroom and slept the entire day. Since my aunt and uncle were full-time working parents, my cousins would mostly stay at our place until my aunt came back from work. My mom was pregnant with my 3rd sister during that time, and she was probably in her 3rd trimester. My aunt came back and called Sue upstairs, but she refused to go for some bizarre reason. My mom, being her usual self, just put it off as some strain, and Sue stayed with us the entire night. Things started right away. I was about 14 or 15 years old, so I remember everything distinctly. The younger sister was about 4 then. I woke up to go to the washroom, and as a child, I was always afraid of the dark. I woke my dad up and he stood outside the bathroom. Now, Sue, Mom, and my younger sister were in one bedroom. My dad and I were sleeping in another one, so we didn't really know what was happening in the other bedroom. My dad just felt something was not right and checked on them, and to his fright, both Sue and the younger sis were missing. He woke my mom up, but my mom's state was almost like she was drugged to sleep. She could barely open her eyes. My dad started waking everyone up, and everyone started looking for them with my uncle, aunt, and cousins. My uncle found Sue and my younger sister crying profusely at the terrace. Sue was standing on the edge of the fence wall, and my younger sister was standing, looking at her, crying irrefutably. They were brought down, and my aunt, uncle, and dad immediately understood that something wasn't right. While all this was happening, my mom woke up and suddenly started screaming from downstairs that Sue was trying to kill her, the baby. But Sue was with us. My aunt looked visually disturbed. She was staring at different points as if she was looking at someone. All the kids were sent downstairs the following day, while Sue was up with my dad, uncle, and aunt. Since my mom was pregnant, she wasn't allowed to be. My cousins were all grown-ups, but they knew something was wrong because my younger sister had been crying non-stop since last night. Nothing could calm her down. They all were trying to get her to sleep, but in vain. She too looked at different points and continued crying. Around noontime, a priest came, and Sue tricked all of them and came downstairs, which scared us. She looked at my mom and gave an evil scowl. She carried my sister away. She was jumping in weird postures when just everyone stopped her. And then we could see that she was possessed. She hurled abuses in Hebrew. The priest told us that it was Hebrew. And also in Arabic and Urdu. She spoke in about 12 different voices which everybody heard. There were voices of women and men, and it still sends chills down my spine to even think of it. They sent us all upstairs again. And meanwhile, my mother started sensing the anxiety of something, and unfortunately, her water broke. She was taken to the hospital by my cousins while my aunt and uncle and dad stayed at home with Sue. To this day, I don't know what happened, because my dad never spoke of it, but we came back from the hospital the next day and Sue was gone. She wasn't there. Nobody said of her, and the priest did some recitations on all of us. We shifted from that house because, all the negative energy there. About 2 years later, Sue was brought back home. She looked like she had bones left, nothing else. She didn't remember anything also. My uncle and aunt tried to normalize her life, but truly in vain. In 2 or 3 weeks, her health deteriorated, and she passed away. Except for my uncle, aunt, and dad, nobody knows what happened or where she was taken. My uncle and dad both passed away, so the only person who knows now is my aunt, and she will never speak of it. It's an unspoken rule not to talk or mention those 2 nightmare days in the house. That night, the priest there died on an accident, precisely 3 days after Sue was taken away from home. That house was sold right after Sue passed away. To this day, I never experienced something even remotely as chilling as this. From the day my younger sister was born, my cousins, me, and my sisters never go a day without doing the recitations that we were told to do by that priest. It's like a routine for us now. Door unlocked and opened twice. 2 different doors. Alright, so something seriously weird happened just a little while ago that really creeped me out. I'm not usually one to see any paranormal stuff like my mom or my sister, so for me to say that I think it was a ghost is super out of the ordinary. So I let my cat into my porch. I closed the door and I locked it. I then proceeded to eat my lunch while my mom was vacuuming the bathroom floor. Once I was done, I double-checked that the door was closed and went on my way to play some games in my room. About 10 minutes pass, my mom enters my room and starts interrogating me about if I had just come from opening the back door. To this, I replied, "No. I was on my bed the whole time, and I know I locked and closed that door." She then asked my older sister, who replied that she was in her room doing assignments for college. She was doing this the whole time, apparently, and that it definitely wasn't her. Creeped out, obviously, my mom explains that when she finished vacuuming, she heard the door alarm chirp signaling somebody opened the door. And when she went to see which one of us went outside, it was like a good 6 inches apart open, and my dog had bolted all the way to my parents' room away from the living room and hid under the bed. When we checked all the back porch cameras. They didn't activate to any movement. It definitely would have if I opened the door or somebody was on the porch. We checked all the rooms in the house. Nothing. My sister then commented that the door to the garage had opened earlier in the day in the same fashion, and that 2 of the cabinets were wide open, but she didn't think much of it. Needless to say, I'm kind of creeped out, and I know it wasn't my mom because she's very neurotic about locking doors and closing them. So much so sometimes that we get locked out by her. TL:DR. Somebody tell me what that means. I have no idea. TL:DR locked doors opened like 6 inches by themselves 2 different times. 2 cabinet doors opened completely open. Dog got scared, ran away to hide under the bed. No intruders in-house. Everybody was in their own rooms. No explanation, and camera didn't detect any movement. Sometimes the bedroom doors open a little bit, but that's just because of the drafts. And that said back door is metal, and it was more than just a crack. I mean, it was quite a bit open, and I know I locked it. I don't know, I'm feeling creeped out. I didn't really believe my family when they said they felt weird things or saw things in the house, since I'm a bit of a skeptic, but even this I can't explain. I wish my dog was afraid of something. My dog is crazy. I keep getting creepy feelings after being in a treatment center. In March of 2019, I was admitted to a residential treatment center. It was a little unique for a treatment center. I believe, but I'm not sure, because I don't have anything to compare it to. The center was a mansion in the mountains. I think it was a vacation home for a doctor or something before the center bought it. I was with about 15 other girls there, people who were admitted and discharged every once in a while, but the maximum capacity was 16 girls. When I first got there, the girls and the staff told me that there was a ghost named Benjamin. I figured they were just playing a trick on me, or something like that. I was new. I didn't believe in ghosts. I'm still not sure what to believe, but I know there was something in that house. Every day we would have a journal writing and meditation hour. The staff would put meditation music on the TV and leave the remote in the kitchen counter. There was only one remote. We wrote in our journals and stuff in the living room, which was next to the kitchen and an open floor plan type space. However, no one, including the staff, was close enough to the remote to be able to touch it without us noticing. Several times while meditation music was playing on YouTube and the TV, the music would just stop. It would exit the video, scroll through suggested videos, and select something else. The meditation channel was a live channel, so it wasn't because the video just ended, and it wasn't just playing the watch next suggestion. It was literally scrolling through video choices. Most of the time it just chose random videos that were weird, but pretty harmless. I don't remember specifics because, again, it was over a year ago. Once, though, it selected a video of a girl killing herself. I have no idea why that video was on YouTube. Me neither. The TV was the first weird thing that I witnessed personally, but I still dismissed it. I figured we were having some kind of glitchy remote. The next thing that happened that I saw was during school. We had school in a large bedroom upstairs. The classroom had a doorway, but no door. I was talking to the school counselor at a table close to the doorway. We heard whistling and footsteps coming up the stairs. One of the therapists at the center would always whistle as he was coming up the stairs. But he had been gone for a while because his wife had died from cancer. We both jumped up and ran out of the classroom to see if it was him. It would have been strange because his wife had died just that week. But there was no one there. And during our school time, there's only like one regular staff member that isn't in the classroom. And they usually stay in the kitchen, though, and pretty much all the main floor is visible from the balcony upstairs. We asked the staff member who was sitting in the kitchen. Maybe she had walked up the stairs just then, but she says that she hadn't. Another time, close to bedtime, we were finishing the nightly checkup where we fill out a mood questionnaire thing and share it with the group. And we had finished chores, which usually includes vacuuming the upstairs landing. I had done this chore, and specifically remember turning the vacuum cleaner off and moving it to the corner. The upstairs landing is huge, and all of us girls and the staff were in the other corner sharing the checkups. The vacuum cleaner turned on, and it was in a different place than where I had put it. At night, we aren't allowed to do the checkups until everyone is ready for bed. On the landing with the doors to their bedrooms closed. The bedroom doors automatically locked when you closed them, and one of the bedroom doors would get stuck sometimes. Girls would occasionally struggle to open it after changing. This was a long-term residential place, and so some of the higher-level girls could be alone in the bedrooms unsupervised with the doors closed to change. Anyways, the doorknob was jiggling back and forth and the door was shaking a bit, so we figured a girl was stuck. One of the staff unlocked the room, but no one was in there. They checked the closet, but there was definitely no one in the bedroom. We'd also heard a little boy's voice in the basement most nights. I think the girls just named him Benjamin themselves, but I'm not really sure. Benjamin pretty much terrorized us, though. None of us slept alone, ever. When girls in our bedroom were out on the weekend pass, we would sleep on the landing with the staff. We weren't required to, we just were terrified of being alone in our bedrooms at night. There were security cameras everywhere, and the doors to the outside had some kind of high-tech magnetic locks that could only be opened with key cards. Whenever they were opened, a chime would sound. One night, the chime sounded when everyone was upstairs. The staff checked the security cameras to find the door to the garage open and close by itself. Another night, we heard loud slams downstairs, then a couple more. When the staff checked the cameras, the cupboard doors were slamming by themselves. I've seen this footage, so I know it isn't the staff messing with us. I doubt they would do that anyways. The faucets would turn on, like the knobs would full-on turn. This is while we were staring directly at them, mind you. When we would shower, we would hear knocks at the bathroom door, but no one would be there, and the staff were supposed to check on us every 15 minutes. But they would announce themselves by name. They don't just knock on the door. It got to the point that none of us were sleeping at night in general, and the staff wouldn't go into the basement by themselves. And when we were getting ready for bed, we would just have another girl sit outside the door and talk to us the whole time. Once in the shower, we heard the knock on the door, which eventually we just tried to ignore because it happened so much. Our shower curtains were those cheap semi-see-through ones where if you put something directly against the curtain, you can see the color and the outline of it. I thought I heard somebody inside the bathroom, so I poked my head out of the shower. But there was nothing there. Closed the curtain again. There was a hand on the other side. Like not just a handprint, but an actual hand touching the outside of the curtain. I yanked the curtain back. There was still no one there. I just got dressed as fast as I could and went back out on the landing. Other things happened there. But honestly, there were so many things that it'd take too long to list them all. I know most of these sound strange more than outright scary, but there was always this feeling in the place when things would happen. I don't really know how to describe it, but it would just make all of us terrified. Some girls would get goosebumps or start sweating. I've never had something so terrifying happen in my life, and I lived there for 4 months. I felt trapped because I couldn't leave, and Benjamin seemed to be getting worse every day. The treatment center was fairly new. I think it had only been open for about a year before it was admitted. But from what I can tell, Benjamin had been there the whole time. I don't really know what it was there, but I feel like it was something. Sometimes I'll sort of tell some of what happened to my friends, but I don't think they really believe that a lot of it actually happened. Ever since getting discharged last August, I still get creepy feelings. Nothing's happened since then, so don't think whatever it was has followed me. But I really haven't been able to make peace with whatever happened in that house. I think a lot of the girls that were there were feeling kind of the same. I just don't really know where to turn, and tonight's especially hard for some reason. So I guess I may as well try this platform. Or Paranormal M. I'm mostly just venting. Believe what you will, but I swear it's true, even if it sounds crazy. If someone has had a similar experience with things they can't explain, any advice on how to feel less terrified and creeped out constantly would be extremely appreciated. I think I just need some advice and support for dealing with it. Camp Capilano, Vancouver, BC haunting. So when I was growing up, I would spend some of my spring breaks at a cabin in North Van near Capilano. We called the cabin Camp Capilano, and I would go at the local community center. I believe the cabin we went to was in the 1992 movie, To Grandma's House We Go. It was the house the grandmother lived in. But anyways, I had stayed at this cabin multiple times with this group, and we had other kids, and we stayed there with our leaders also. We had always all slept together in the side of the cabin that had a quote-unquote boys sign on the door. Never really thought anything of it, but the last year that I ever went to that camp, we stayed in the girls' side. I had thought the cabin felt sad and strange to begin with, but for some reason sleeping on the side we left empty the previous years gave me anxiety. After 5 years, I need an explanation. There's this small forest close to my friend's house where we always used to went to walk his dog. We found out a kid has died there years before. We always had a sensation of another presence being there when we would be there after sunset. So one day we decided to invite a second friend who had quite some experience himself to come along. So after sunset, the three of us and the dog went to the forest to see if we could get contact with the entity. Stupid, I know. The second friend spoke some Latin in words at the edge of the forest. He said that this would help us. The moment we stepped into the forest, I saw a white entity in a tree a couple of meters, less than 20 away from us. It gave off a lot of negative energy, so I told my friends about it. They said that they felt it too, and this wasn't the entity that we wanted to contact. The second friend said that this one felt very dangerous. The dog was also nervous and scared at the moment and wanted to run. So we keep on walking away from the presence, and I think we pissed it off. I don't know why, but it did feel that way. After about 5 minutes, I felt another presence. This one felt friendly. We would hear crunching leaves behind us, but always just out of sight. And when we would stop to look, it would stop as well. One of my friends said that he knows this is one that we wanted to try to contact with, but that the entity wanted to play a little game. So for the whole walk, we would hear running and crunching leaves beside us, never seeing a thing. And the dog never got nervous or scared, so we trusted it. When we would get close to the end of the forest, the running and crunching leaves stopped, and the presence vanished. But when we were about to walk out of the forest, all of us froze. It actually felt like time stood still, or even like we were in another realm. It was very weird. We felt a presence again, a very heavy one. I can remember I couldn't move from the neck down, but when I looked at the exit, there was this tree in the middle of the path. The trunk was split in two about 50 centimeters off the ground, so you could see right between the two arms. Through the split, I could see a very clear silhouette of a young girl behind the tree. I could see the face, but it was facing us. At that moment, the dog started to bark. I remember the second friend said something in Latin again, and everything went back to normal. We could move again, and the entity was gone. All of us were freaking out and didn't understand what happened, so we immediately went to my friend's house after. I still don't know what we encountered that day, and neither do the others. A voice said, "Pretty," in my ear. Several years ago, I was living in a house with my mom, dad, and dog. I was around 16 or 17 at the time, I think. My room was upstairs while my parents slept downstairs. I sometimes listen to music or have a YouTube video on in the background to help me go to sleep, and sometimes I don't. That particular night, I didn't feel like I needed the extra sound to fall asleep, so I was just laying in silence with the AC buzzing in the background. My bed was pressed into a corner of my room, and I was on my side facing the wall. I had only closed my eyes and settled in for a few minutes, so it wasn't one of those half-asleep things. I was very much awake. When I heard this deep, guttural, throaty male voice breathe the word "pretty" into my ear, I froze, and the first thought being that somebody had broken in and I was about to be assaulted or kidnapped or something. I waited a second before turning my phone on and whirling around, pointing the light in the space behind me. It was empty. My dog, who'd fallen asleep in my room earlier in the night, was on the floor, having been woken up from the voice, the light or the sound of my bed creaking from me moving, not sure which. They were just looking around in confusion, ears perked. I was absolutely terrified, and after checking my room and the rest of the upstairs for signs of a trespasser, I lay back down and turned on a YouTube video to calm me down. I eventually went back to sleep, but it wasn't easy. My dog had been asleep, and my parents had been asleep downstairs, and no one had broken into our house that night to whisper "pretty" into my ear, and then vanish. But to this day, I can still remember almost exactly what that voice sounded like, and I'm 99% positive it wasn't a weird dream thing. You know, since, like I said, I just settled into sleep and I was still awake. I also have no history of auditory hallucinations. There was one other odd or paranormal thing that happened to me in that house, but the two events don't seem to be related at all. It was like a brand new house with like two previous owners, both of whom I'm pretty sure were still alive at the time. I have no idea what happened, but something or someone absolutely whispered pretty in my ear while I was trying to sleep. My cousin and I were kind of terrorized in her basement. First, a little background information that's important to fully understand the story. My mother's sister and her husband have a house in Colorado. It has a finished basement. The basement has a fully furnished bedroom and bathroom and a sort of a living room area with a couch and a TV. And it also has a little kitchenette as well. I grew up visiting my three cousins, aunt and uncle, and my grandparents every summer from the time I was 5 up until 2 or 3 years ago. I'm 21 now, by the way. The basement became more or less the guest room. So that's where I would stay whenever I would visit so that I could have a little space of my own. That and the fact that their cat rarely ever went down to the basement, and I'm pretty severely allergic to cats. This particular event occurred around the time I was 17 or 18, and my younger cousin, I'm going to call her Megan, they were around 16 or 15. The night started totally normal. We all had dinner, listened to music, watched something, and then at around midnight we all headed off to bed. Because of a different experience I had down there a few years prior, I was really nervous about staying in the basement alone. So my wonderful cousin Megan took one for the team and had been staying in the basement with me for the duration of my trip. We had been chilling in the living room of the basement for about 3 hours. We were drawing and just hanging out when it all started. I was in the process of explaining the premise of a show I had started. This is when we heard what sounded like an old man clearing his throat coming from the bathroom. I knew it wasn't her, since I was maintaining eye contact with her the whole time and her mouth hadn't opened. And she knew it wasn't me, since I was in the middle of just saying something. We both paused and then confirmed that we both heard the cough. Our minds immediately went to, there's a man hiding in the bathroom. Since they'd have some people in the past attempt to break in through the basement windows, especially. I wanted to go upstairs, get one of her older siblings to check it out, but Megan insisted on checking it out ourselves. We went to the bathroom, turned on the lights, and saw that it was completely empty. There was, however, a linen closet which had the door closed. She opened the door, and we saw what honestly looked like the shape of a man trying to hide under some blankets. Megan immediately reared her leg back and kicked the blanket with full force, only to discover it was just some blankets spilling over the lower shelves that we'd forgotten existed. As Megan tended to her now stubbed toes, we heard that same cough sound come from what sounded like the entrance of the basement. We slowly crept out of the basement, looked around the basement to no avail, and without a word both started packing up all of our things, like our sketchbooks and my laptop. And rather than leave the basement, we went to the bedroom and locked the door. There was a giant floor-length mirror in the room which we used to bar the door. We did all of this in complete silence. Some weird primal understanding going between us that we had to be as quiet as humanly possible. As we tiptoed around the room, we heard what sounded like shuffling outside of the door. At that point, I was still somewhat convinced that there was a living person in the basement with us, since the sounds were so clear and the feeling of being there or someone else being down there was so strong. Megan settled into bed while I sat against the wall next to the vanity, charging my phone. We were texting each other rather than speaking, since that pressure of being silent was still incredibly intense. We decided to each spam text our siblings, trying to wake them up to come down to our rescue. There was no reply. Megan even texted her mom, but still nobody woke up. I texted my mom, who did wake up, but all she said was to call the police if we were certain that there was somebody in the basement with us. While we knew there was something in the basement with us, we didn't know if it was actually someone who had broken in, and neither of us wanted to risk bothering the police for something dumb. After about an hour, Megan's phone started dying, so we decided to switch spots. We were both so scared of making any sort of noise for any reason, and neither of us really understood why. But we made sure to walk on our toes and take steps at the exact same time to minimize the amount of sound that we made. At one point, Megan started smothering me with a pillow because I had an allergy attack and kept sneezing. With the both of us now situated, we tried to relax, still being kind of terrorized by the sounds of somebody shuffling around outside the door and the occasional cough. At around 5, we heard what sounded like a small animal fall into the grate that's also kind of acting as a window for the basement bedroom, begin running around. The rocks at the bottom moving and bouncing off the window. Then it went silent. About 10 minutes later, it sounded like another animal fell in and the sound started up again. This cycle continued for pretty much the entire hour, if I'm remembering correctly. The entire time all of this was happening, Megan and I were terrified. It was like that feeling you get right before your car gets rear-ended, or right as you're about to go down a giant roller coaster. Just plain fear, anxiety, and the subtle feeling that something's just not right. It doesn't sound like much, but for some reason, Megan and I were just absolutely scared out of our minds. We both understood that we were not alone in that basement, and whatever was down there with us was actively trying to freak us out. We were saved at around 7. The sun started to rise. We heard my uncle get up to take their dogs out. Neither Megan nor I had slept at all. We felt suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline that had been filling us the entire night seemed to die out. The sound hadn't stopped, but they had significantly decreased as the hours passed. Now, hearing her dad up and about, we felt a little safe without leaving the comfort of the bedroom. We quietly and quickly moved the mirror back to its space on the wall, and then, I counted 3, unlocked the door and ran to the stairs. We didn't stop to look around or turn off any of the lights, even though by that point the basement was fully illuminated in sunlight, and the lights that we had left on were just sort of vacating in the living room. Excuse me. We booked it up the stairs, came to a screeching halt in the kitchen, where Dad was making coffee or something. We immediately told him everything and begged him to check out the basement, still not fully convinced that it wasn't a normal person. He checked, and sure enough, nothing had been tampered with and the entire basement was empty. Megan made us some ramen for breakfast, since we were starving and just wanting something comfortable, and after eating, she went upstairs to tell her mom. I stayed downstairs eating and trying to come to terms with what I'd just experienced. Her mom didn't believe her at first, but when I told the same story and Megan almost started crying for not being believed, she changed her mind. My aunt was resistant to the idea that her house, specifically the basement, was haunted. But then she did experience it for herself later that year. The main thing I remember from this whole ordeal was the fear. It was so raw and intense. It's like there was this weird knowledge that we weren't alone down there, and whatever it was not good. Megan and my other cousin theorized that it was Theodore, the name they gave the resident ghost that stays down there. But I don't think so. Nothing like that's happened to anyone else ever again. And it's just not what we know to be Theodore's style. I don't know. I don't know what's down there with us or who. I don't know why they were there or what they wanted, really. But there was something scary with us that night. and it scared me in a way I've never, ever felt since. The night I believed in ghosts. The night I changed my mind about ghosts. Hello all, I've had a paranormal experience in the past that I've mostly kept to myself and only shared briefly a couple of times with friends. I could never forget what happened that night, so I decided rather than keeping this to myself, that I'd share my experiences. It was the summer of second grade. I was about 7 years old and I played baseball with my cousin. Although this experience was 15 years ago, I remember it all so clearly. Almost every weekend I would stay over at his house so we could go to practice early in the morning. However, every once in a while our weekend practices would get canceled because of weather or a coach just not being able to make it out to practice. On this night, our practice was canceled the next morning. My cousin had always told me wild stories about their house being haunted, and them being okay with it, although sometimes they'd get a little freaked out. Mosquito in my face. I never bought into any of their claims because I didn't think anything like this could be real. I stood up pretty late playing video games with my cousin on his PlayStation. We were playing some bass fishing game. Around midnight, my cousin had fallen asleep. I stood up to play more games. I had finally decided to go to sleep at around 1:30 a.m. About an hour or two after I went to sleep, I woke up to the sound of my younger cousin, 2 years old, crying. I decided that I didn't want to deal with it, so I grabbed my pillow, threw it at my cousin. "Nathan, your brother's crying in the living room." My cousin is a heavy sleeper, so he didn't even budge. I attempted to get his attention one more time by calling out to him from across the room, with still no answer. So after about a 10-minute length of time of his crying, I went out to take him back to his mom. Got out of bed, retrieved my pillows, walked up the 3 steps at the door going into the living room. As soon as I walked through the door frame into the living room, my cousin's crying ceases. It doesn't just quiet down or slowly stop. His crying completely stops as soon as I step through that doorway. This took me back a second. Thought it was weird, but then I continued to look for my cousin. I searched the living room, the hallway, the kitchen, and the bathroom, but I couldn't find him. Figured he stopped crying and went back to bed, so I decided to do the same. After laying in bed for 10 or so minutes, I couldn't fall asleep. I hear my cousin start crying again, louder than last time. I follow my same routine and try to get my older cousin's attention, but same as before, he didn't wake up. So I get to check on my younger cousin. I don't even bother to grab my pillow this time. I walked up the 3 steps and stepped into the living room. As soon as I passed through the door frame, his crying stopped, same as before. But at this moment, I started to remember all the things that my cousin would tell me about their house being haunted. I'm a little freaked out now, so this time I turn out all the lights on. I searched everywhere for my younger cousin, but just like the first time, I couldn't find him. I'm frightened because it doesn't make much sense to me what's going on, so I turn off all the lights and quickly walk back to my cousin's room and lay down. Try to go to sleep, but only a few minutes later I hear the sound of a grown man yelling from down the street. I try to blow this off because my cousin doesn't live too far from a park that a few homeless people stay at. I figure it's just a man on drugs or something. However, his screaming is constant. The scream is just constant. It's getting louder and getting closer. Now the sound appears to be only a few houses down, and the yelling feels like it's right outside the window. I covered my head under the blankets as if to keep me safe, until the crescendo sounded. It was sounding like it was right next to me, shrieking in my ear. Then it suddenly stops. It didn't slow down or quiet down. It just completely stopped. It was just like my cousin's crying. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I just laid there shaking under my blanket. The next morning I told my cousin Nathan about everything that happened that night. After telling him everything that happened, I remember his saying, "That's crazy. See, I told you my house is haunted." Two-year-old sees eyes in his room. So we don't normally use my son's bedroom except for play and clothes. He's 2, and he sleeps with us. 2 nights ago I left the door open so he could freely roam in and out. You can see down the hallway to his room from the living room, so this wasn't a big deal safety-wise. He's just quietly playing in his room for a while. Then suddenly he sprints out for obvious, genuine distress yelling. "Scary, scary eyes." He was pointing to his room. I ask him what's wrong and he keeps repeating, "Eyes." So I take his hand and ask him to show me. He takes me to his room and points to an empty wall. There's nothing on this wall except a window covered by a curtain. He was pointing to the right of the window. I reassured him that he's safe and it's okay, and privately dismissed it as an act of imagination. About an hour later, he points down the hall again, yelling about eyes. As soon as I move in to investigate, he just gasps in shock and says, "Gone." And that was it. Fast forward to today, we're babysitting for a friend. The daughter in question is 12 and a skeptic, and they're playing in his room. We did not tell her about the eyes. I hear him talk about the eyes again, and she comes out to tell me pretty much the same story I experienced 2 nights ago. This time I ask him to show me where the eyes are specifically, and he points to the same spot as before. Can't see me as he's in the front, just facing away, but the second I looked up to where he was pointing, he gasped and said, "Gone," just like the first time. I've tried asking questions, but I don't think he has the vocabulary yet to really answer them. All I can get is that the eyes are there, and that they're scary. I saw a boy with black eyes. 5 years ago, my sister gave birth to her second child. And because her partner was working at sort of a shift work as a security guard, I often went over to her house on the nights that he worked to give her company and help with the kids. She lives about a 10-minute drive from me, so the routine was usually me going over there around 5 p.m. and leaving to come home around 12 or 1. On one of these nothing out of the ordinary nights, I left at the usual time and drove home singing to tunes in the car. I didn't really feel tired as I've always been a night owl, and I was just eager to get home and chill out after the stress of rocking a baby to sleep for over an hour. It happened every night with my nephew. The estate I live in has 2 main entrances that both lead you toward a big roundabout, which I have to turn at to go in the direction of my house. When I approached the roundabout, I could see a small light almost flickering on the street that continued directly ahead of the other side of the roundabout. So basically, it was straight ahead. I remember saying, "What the f*** is that?" And instead of turning left to go in the direction of my house, I made the quick decision to drive straight through and see what it was. The light was moving rapidly in a short space, and within seconds, my car was close enough to see that the source of the light was a torch that a little boy was using to move back and forth in a patch of dirt that he was kneeling on. He looked to be around 4 years old, and he had neat blonde hair and seemed to just be playing in the dirt alone at 1 a.m. in the morning. I slowed down the car and stopped in front of him. My window was already down and he was on the same side of the street that the driver's side of my car was on, so we were a couple feet apart. Once I had stopped, the car was still running, but I had my foot on the brake and I was about to ask him what he was doing outside by himself when his head shot up really quickly and he started staring directly at me. His eyes were entirely black, no other color in them, and I saw them very, very clearly. I think it took me about 3 seconds to register what I had seen and kick in the flight mode, and I sped off. I did tell my friends and family about the experience, but for some reason it was never something that lingered in my mind. It was almost as though I woke up the next day and just put what I had seen in the back of my mind. With some hindsight now, I think that putting it away in the back of my mind was my way of dealing with witnessing something like that. Almost as though my brain couldn't handle it, if that makes any sense. Phone calls from beyond the grave. My family's always been somewhat sensitive to the paranormal. More than a few of us have had unexplained instances, but nothing like what kept happening a few years back. The year was 2000. While the world survived Y2K, unfortunately my great-grandmother did not. A few months after her death, every few days we would receive phone calls from a number caller ID, and it was saying 000000000. Every time we picked up, it was a constant white noise like a TV channel that didn't come in right. The first few times we simply assumed something was going on with the phone line and disregarded it. However, for whatever reason, we just always picked it up. Now, for those of you young ones on Reddit, the year 2000 was a different time. Cell phones were new and most people had landlines. The worst part was the fact that almost all the internet was dial-up, meaning a simple phone call would interrupt the song you spent the past 5 hours downloading on LimeWire. So obviously these white noise calls became an annoyance very quickly. Finally, my mother called the phone company to see if they could see where it was coming from. Well, once the phone company investigated the number, they discovered the calls were coming from a payphone, but not just any payphone. This payphone happened to be located right outside the cemetery where we had a few short months ago laid my granny to rest. Not only that, but the payphone was disconnected from a couple of years before and wasn't even capable of making calls. This settles it for my family. We decided it was my granny. So every time the calls came, we simply spoke to her the same way we always had, and all was good. The calls continued for around 2 years at this point. I lived at the time in an area where tornadoes were rare, but when we had one, it tended to be incredibly damaging. One night, one came through the neighborhood causing a lot of damage. However, my home was thankfully spared. Not long after it passed, the phone rang, and this time, however, instead of white noise, my mother swears that she heard her ask if everyone's okay. Mom reassured her that we're all fine, everything's okay. And after that, the call stopped, and hope she moved on to find her peace, knowing that we're okay. 10 years later, both my grandmother and grandfather have passed and have been buried alongside the rest of our family. My mom decided to move into her parents' home. At the time, I'm living with a boyfriend, and we decided to stop by the cemetery so I can introduce him to my beloved grandparents. Once I get back in the car, I check Facebook. My mother had only 2 minutes before posted a photo of a phone showing the same 000 number and saying after so many years she's finally hearing from heaven again. I call her frantic because I'm literally staring at their graves at the very moment. She received the call while my ex and I were standing there. My only assumption to this day was my family really didn't like my boyfriend then, and was willing to call beyond the grave to make that fact known. That was the last call we ever received, but not our last experience. To this day, however, we still have the same landline number just in case they ever need to talk to us again. The Gentleman in the Mortuary. So I worked at a mortuary for a little while, embalming and cremating and picking up bodies. This story/experience isn't super scary, just very weird. The room we embalmed in was your average white clean filled to the brim with chemicals and embalming tools and 3 stainless steel prep tables. I spent a lot of time in there giving after-death care to our descendants. Excuse me. So the scary factor of being surrounded by dead people wasn't really a thing for me at that point. Although some nights I slept there when I was on call, and it was certainly eerie every time something creaked, or when I put the lights out, and all that was left was a deep red glow from the lit-up Coke vending machine that we had. There was one day, though, that actually spooked me to the point of asking my coworkers about it. I'd begun the usual routine, but something caught my eye. I looked up and noticed a man standing in that bright white room wearing a black suit and tie, watching me do my work. He was almost translucent, so pale. An old man. Needless to say, I went ahead and exited the room as calmly as I could. When I told my coworkers about it, they all sort of glanced between each other and smirked. Almost unanimously, they said, "Oh, yes. That's Mr. I forgot his name in parentheses. We've all seen him. He wears a suit, right? Always standing in the corner of the room." I'm a skeptic for the most part, but events like this make me wonder. It was so normal to see this man, but no one really knew why he hung around the mortuary like that. I wonder if he was ever mistreated after he died. Not every mortuary worker is a stand-up person. Why would a ghost or spirit linger somewhere other than where he or she died? Anyway, we had occasionally seen creepy things in the huge empty field surrounding the mortuary as well, but I'd like to think it was our minds playing tricks. Knowing where we were and what we did probably heightened our nerves enough for us to perceive strange happenings. But I'll always wonder who the man in the mortuary was, and why he was in the embalming room. Childhood ghost. Might be cliche so far, considering this is the internet, and people lie all the time, but I'm hoping somebody hears me out. When I was a kid, I used to see a tall woman wearing white with black hair. They would enter my little sister's room, followed by a small baby crawling behind her at nighttime. My sister and I had all sorts of experiences with being suddenly grabbed. I think we all know the difference between a muscle twitch and an actual grab. She never saw the woman, but she did hear a woman constantly tell her, "They need me." It was terrifying, and I've always been plagued with horrifyingly vivid, violent, and graphic nightmares and night terrors, even to this day. But as an adult, I question the legitimacy of what we experienced as a kid because, well, we have no proof. Fast forward to present day. I'm 30 and she's 26. She is a baby now. When I was on the phone with her not long ago, she stepped away with her kid who was crying, and I heard a hissing whisper say, "Stay with me," which gave me the heebie-jeebies. But I joked about hearing a ghost as soon as she left, and she froze. She asked me what it said. I told her, to which she replied with, "Dude, there's a fucking ghost in here," and omitting his name. My husband doesn't really believe me, but I hear it all the time. So of course I'm like, that's creepy as heck, but okay. A couple of weeks go by and she recently messaged me saying her son was acting weird the moment she heard something again. He looked directly into the corner of the room and whined. He's 2 years old, so it's that baby whine that they do when they don't like something. Today she sent me videos from her camera monitor thing. Her son was sleeping and woke up saying, "Stop it," over and over. And then later on repeating, "Go away, go away, go away," wiggling around uncomfortably. I cannot help but be completely and utterly creeped out by this. My sister isn't somebody who makes shit up for funsies and fake videos. I asked her if I could share it here. She said no, which I guess I understand. And I know there'll be naysayers, I get that too. But I'm starting to question it more and more. Not really looking for any solutions or advice, but if we do have any, I'm down to listen, or any input at all. Trying to figure out what's in my house. So I've lived in the same house for the better part of 25 years now. When I first noticed it, it just seemed that every now and then a shadow would be slightly out of place, based on natural lighting. Think elongated or bulged from what the shadow would be. You'd walk in, see a shadow, just a hair out of the ordinary. Could be night, could be the middle of the day. Leave the room and return a few minutes later, and the shadow would have recessed back to where it should be based on the lighting. About 7 years ago, I saw a pair of solid black legs standing clear off the wall. Walked past my bedroom door. I was so convinced that somebody had to be in the house, I grabbed my pistol, woke everyone up, checked every inch of the house from top to bottom. Absolutely nothing was out of place. I restate, slept in the same room for the better part of 20 years total. I am well aware of what shadows cast from outside look like. Following this, however, things calmed down for a few years. Now, whatever it is has actively tried to not draw attention to itself. I don't have any feelings, maybe dread, malice, nah. Unless I'm sure it's one of the area that I intentionally corner whatever it may be into that area. Recently, it's taken to moving around at near floor level, at about the size of a new cat. Likely once again attempting to go unnoticed, but it's gotten considerably bolder with its movements. Several times making me juke and turn on a light because I thought I nearly stepped on my cat, only for the cat to still be asleep on the other side of the house. Now the random moving shadow isn't all. Not only myself, but everyone in the house regularly thinks that we hear the other call out her name, or that one of us has music, never distinguishable but audible enough to hear, coming from somewhere in the house. At one point, I distinctly heard an unknown woman's voice say, "I'm right here." I had to go outside and see if somebody was talking loudly in the neighborhood. Big surprise. Nobody was outside and no extra cars were around. It reached a point where I went to both an optometrist and a psychologist to make sure my vision was solid and that I wasn't losing my mind to stress or something. Completely clear on both fronts. I've made attempts to photograph or capture on video any proof, but as I said, for whatever reason, it absolutely does not want to be noticed by anyone. I don't have any intention of trying to press it to do anything, nor am I concerned about its presence in the house. I'm just curious as to what it could be. And I'm curious if you had a good time listening. See ya.